All right, welcome to a very exciting episode of It's All Relational. I am joined by President-Elect Claudia Johnson, and we are going to be talking about conference this week.
All Things Conference.
Yes,
Hi,
all things.
Trevor.
Hi, hi. So Claudia, we are, WAMS has this really interesting governance structure where there's basically three presidents at any given time, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely, really useful for kind of capturing wisdom from previous iterations of the board. Can you talk more about kind of what your role is as president-elect?
Yeah. So, just to give a little bit more context, what you were referring about three presidents. Right now, we have our past president was
Hmm.
Anthony Pennant,
Hmm.
Dr. Pennant, and now our current president is Billy Tyler, Dr.
Hmm.
Tyler,
Hmm.
and I'm the president-elect. So
Hmm.
that means that I am learning what's it called, like the ropes,
Yes.
right, from
Yes.
them.
Right.
And Anthony serves in his role and capacity, as
Right.
legacy because he's been a
Right.
part of the organization for like more than 7 years.
Yes.
And he comes in with this well of knowledge in terms of operations and how things have been
Totally.
handled and managed. And Billy got to learn from him when he was president, and Billy was
Hmm.
president-elect. And now
Right.
Billy's serving her first year as president.
Hmm.
And I've been serving the past 8 months now as president-elect.
Yes.
So I'm learning from Billy and
Right.
Anthony. And my responsibility as president-elect is what we're discussing today, which is conference. All
Hmm.
things conference.
Yes. Yes. It's very exciting. It's cool. I mean, as marriage family therapists, this kind of intergenerational idea is pretty neat, and having a governance structure that really honors that and allows for, wisdom from previous boards is really useful, I think, for everyone. So yes, like you said, as president-elect, you're spending 2 years working on primarily your responsibility being managing the annual conference. So
Yes.
tell us more about this year's annual conference coming up here in September.
Absolutely. Well, the theme of this year's conference is Systemic Futures, Creative Approaches to Dialogue and Healing.
Mm,
And I thought that this was a theme that was really on point with everything that is happening. I
yeah,
think marriage and family therapists are always rewriting and expanding, or like
yeah,
adding maybe even letters to
yes,
already what is in LMFT.
right,
And I wanted to provide a space where clinicians and also different providers and different
mhm,
professions could come
right,
together and
hmm,
discuss what it's like to be a professional in this day and age, and
yeah,
also what are we excited for, what's
right,
coming up, what
right,
are the ways in which we can grow,
yeah,
and also how do we support one another, because
hmm,
there's one of the tracks that is about healing the healers. We're
yeah,
we're at the forefront of that work, and then who takes care of us? So
hmm,
that was something that I thought was also really important to
yeah.
incorporate in this year's conference.
Totally. So much discussion right now, I think, for everyone socially and certainly in the field about the future and where things are going with, technology innovations and how that works with alongside of marriage and family therapy. So it's really exciting to think about, the work we're doing and what people are going to be able to experience at conference, helping them right through these transitions and, like we think about with life cycle changes and transitions in a family,
Absolutely.
any kind of change is, there's danger and opportunity in those moments, right? And we're
Hmm.
trying to help folks really access those opportunities.
Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Hmm.
So, just revisiting a little bit when I mentioned those like tracks, I'd
Hmm.
love to say a little
Yes.
bit more. So, we have three core
Yes. Hmm.
tracks, and one is expanding systemic sex there. Sorry, I'm a sex therapist, so it's like automatic in my brain.
Yes.
It's
Right.
like sex therapy. No, there's something to that, but I'll get to it. So the first one is expanding systemic therapy. That's what I
Yes.
wanted to
Hmm.
say.
Hmm.
And it's about exploring how therapists are
Hmm.
embracing just interdisciplinary, creative,
Right.
right, like emerging approaches
Right.
to the work that we're doing and the impact
Hmm.
of that. Right.
Yes.
So it was important for me to have folks that maybe, specialize in perinatal mental health, or folks
Yeah.
that are, EMDR certified, or
Right.
things that are different modalities or
Hmm.
approaches or
Hmm. Right.
particular populations that are
Hmm.
also part of our systemic world.
Right.
So that
Right.
particular core track
Yeah.
is addressing this piece. And then the second one is the one that I was referring to before, which is healing the healers.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there's also like self-care, resilience, and
Yes.
growth. Self-care, resilience, and growth. That's it.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, if we're at the forefront of healing others, our like who's
Hmm.
taking care of us.
Hmm.
So I wanted to make
Absolutely.
sure that this
Yeah.
track focused on our well-being,
Hmm.
on our professional
Yeah.
sustainability as well,
Right. Right.
and how to prevent burnout, with
Hmm.
everything that's happening.
It's
So,
an evergreen topic, right?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
For us, and so very valuable to have that track.
And then the last track, or the third one, has to do with advocacy,
Hmm.
justice,
Hmm.
and systemic change, which is
Hmm.
also something that is at the front of our minds.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And as we know, systemic therapy is deeply rooted and tied to
Hmm.
social justice.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I wanted to incorporate, again,
Hmm.
community and
Yeah.
well-being and
Right.
collective healing. So
Right.
this is a track that is meant to amplify the voices of
Hmm.
folks in
Hmm.
the community that are doing this
Totally.
work, and also how we can get
Right.
involved,
Hmm.
which, as you know, here at WAMT, we're always doing that.
Yeah.
We want to
Absolutely.
connect with the community and
Yeah.
amplify their
It's
voices.
very exciting, to be talking about things like this at the time we're in now. So many folks, I think, are trying to figure out what is our space and role as a therapist, right? Dealing with social changes that are, and things happening politically that are very, very difficult. And that's a complex conversation, right? And I'm glad that we're kind of really trying to take that head on this year with conference. And I think it seems like that's part of the choice in speakers too, right? You were driven to by that kind of same vision.
Absolutely. And before I let our members know a little bit more about the keynote
Hmm.
speakers, I also wanted to say that within those tracks,
Oh,
there's
yes.
going to be an opportunity to receive sex therapy
Oh,
CEUs, as well
wonderful.
as law and
Yes.
ethics CEUs.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
why, sex therapy is still connected to this.
Yes.
So there are some proposals that focus on
Hmm.
sexuality and
Hmm.
systemic therapy. So I think
Right.
that's really exciting.
Yes.
In law and ethics, it means we are going to have some workshops that are going to be focusing on
Hmm.
covering legal and ethical considerations
Hmm.
in
Yep.
systemic therapy. So
Absolutely.
that's all about conference, but switching gears to our keynotes, I am
Yes.
so excited to talk a
Hmm.
little bit more about that.
Hmm.
And our first keynote speaker, who's going to be presenting on Friday,
Hmm.
is Dr. Catherine Gordon,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
Dr. Katie.
Yes.
And just to honor like everything that I'm about to say, I'll just say the title and then we can talk a little bit more. But the
Hmm.
title of her keynote is How to Spark Hope in Hard Times.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes.
So just
Absolutely.
from last.
That's what she is all about, and she has a special focus on suicidality and suicide prevention, right? She's written books about this topic, and it's a really, I really love when, as systemic therapists, we can think about this or talk about this, and you're going to hear that more in my conversation with her later today,
Mm-hmm.
because systemic therapists get to play such an interesting and unique role when it comes to suicide prevention, usually working with people inside of a system, right? Whether it be a family system or a relationship system. And, Dr. Gordon, I think, is going to add a lot of, really useful layers for us to be extra aware of and to utilize while we're in those extremely deep existential conversations with clients.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
I think Dr. Gordon's just expertise when it
Hmm.
comes to eating disorders as well and
Hmm.
suicide prevention
Yeah.
is, I mean,
Yeah.
uh, I I just want to tell folks, please register because you're gonna learn so
Yes.
much.
Totally. And she's got this wonderful presence. I think, for so many of us, especially, I don't know, for myself when I was a younger therapist, everyone's probably like, "Oh, Trevor, you're so young still." So that's surprising you'd say that. But
Baby face, baby face.
yes. No, but when I was early in the field, I was, like very anxious about those conversations with clients
Mhm.
whenever suicidality would come up. And so, to get to a point where you have tools like where you're going to get from Dr. Gordon in this keynote, it allows you to kind of settle into those conversations more and recognize, like, okay, here's what the real risk factors are. Here's what I need to be assessing for. And then from there, let me really engage with my client and not just be freaked out about my ethics concerns,
Mhm.
right?
How to still be present in the
Yeah.
room with our clients when our own anxiety or our own
Yeah.
discomfort, right, shows up. And
Absolutely.
I think why the title is just so beautiful, right? Like
Mhm. Yeah.
sparking hope. So
Yeah.
I'm so excited for her to share her expertise
Awesome.
with us, with all our
Hmm.
membership.
Totally. Awesome. All right. So that's Friday morning.
That is Friday morning,
Awesome.
correct.
Yes.
And on Saturday morning,
Hmm.
we're going to have another amazing keynote.
Hmm.
And this one is kind of like part one and part two.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, part one, we have the incredible Kini Chang
Hmm.
that's going to be traveling to
Hmm.
come see us.
Yes.
And the title of her keynote is Intergenerational Trauma, Resilience, and Collective Healing.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think in
Yes.
itself, it's also, like,
Yeah.
what else can I say?
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah. And people are going to hear from her soon here, after our conversation, Claudia. But, she even kind of talks about how intergenerational trauma, there's a way in which that term is almost like a Western way of looking at
Mm-hmm.
this, and you tapping into kind of ancient wisdom, right? Is what
Absolutely.
she's hoping for in collective wisdom. So it's a really, really powerful ideas that she brings forward.
Absolutely. And as you were saying, her expertise in liberation psychology and
Hmm. Hmm.
the colonial practices
Right.
and indigenous
Right.
justice, right?
Right.
I think
Hmm.
I'm just so excited and thrilled that
Yeah.
we're going to get to learn from
Right.
her work.
Right.
Mhm.
And so you're saying that was part one.
Yes, part one.
Mhm.
Because part two, we get Kini
Mhm.
again,
Mhm.
wonderful Kini,
Yes.
and Dr. Arash.
Mhm.
And part two, the title of this part two is The Miseducation of Our Healing, a Love Letter to Our Collective Recovery.
Mhm.
And this is going to be a little bit more of a panel discussion,
Mhm.
and just
Yes.
like a conversation
Mhm.
between Kini and Dr. Arash,
Yeah.
um, to learn about his work, what he has done, as well as
Right.
Kini's. And
Mhm.
I am so excited because this is, to me, a little bit, this is more of a like a theory to practice,
Mhm.
right? If that makes
Mhm.
sense. Like sometimes
Yes.
we're here just to like
Right.
learn and take notes, but this is a like in practice. Like we're
Yes.
just like learning in this way. So
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that people should be expected from this presentation to be challenged, right? It's going to be expanding your field of view on a lot of issues that our clients face and deal with, and thinking about, like you were kind of saying, Claudia, third order change, how we, kind of incorporate some of these ideas that are really big right into our practice with clients. And Dr. Rosh and Kinney have wonderful chemistry working together, and it's going to be just exciting to see them talk about these ideas, and kind of integrate their shared background around this, all of this stuff, in a meaningful way for our work with clients, right?
absolutely.
And he's got an interesting background. He's not a practicing therapist, but he's worked in, he worked at like San Quentin teaching students there.
Yeah,
He's worked in educational settings in the past, and so he brings just kind of a different lens to all of this. That's going to be just really refreshing, I think, for our membership.
absolutely. And I think his work with like storytelling,
Mhm.
restoring,
Mhm.
um, uh, just experiences. Well, I'm sure he'll introduce himself
Mhm.
in that
Mhm.
episode, but just
Yes.
to give our membership a little bit more information,
Yeah.
he identifies himself as a child that was born during war.
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Absolutely.
later raised in San Francisco
Yeah.
after fleeing a refugee camp.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Yeah.
lived experience as well.
Right.
And he is a he has a doctorate in education.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Yeah.
when I think about um, pedagogy and
Hmm.
curricula,
Hmm.
right, like
Yeah.
just his methodology when it comes to
Right.
storytelling,
Hmm.
and he what he does with that work.
Hmm. Hmm.
I would call it like restorative justice
Yes.
curricula. So that's
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, something that as a clinician you say,
Hmm.
you know, different areas, different avenues, different
Yeah.
professions, but we're all connected and
Absolutely.
we're all
Yeah.
healing in this way.
And it's wonderful to be able to work with folks or hear from folks that are not, just doing what maybe some of us are doing day in and day out with
Hmm.
clients, right? To kind of, again, expand our field of vision around this and what's possible, what we can do with therapy.
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely what's
awesome.
possible. Hmm.
Okay, so this is going to be really, really kind of dynamic speakers that we have as keynotes, and that's not all, right? People are going to be able to see the breakout sessions from a number of other very dynamic speakers as well.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I would
Okay.
say stay tuned because
Yes.
you're going to be hearing all
Yeah.
about the scheduling and the different
Right.
workshops. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Now, all right. So let's talk more details here. When, and where is the conference?
yeah, so the conference is happening next month,
Hmm.
September 19th and 20th. It's a
Yes.
Friday and a Saturday,
Hmm.
and it's happening in Everett,
Hmm.
the Edward D. Hanson Conference Center,
Nice. Nice.
which is, you know, Angel of the Winds. And a lot of folks
Right.
feel or think it's like, oh, it's at the casino.
At the
um,
casino. Yeah.
close-ish, but not
Yeah.
really to the casino.
Well,
More
it's
like
really
downtown
cool,
Everett.
beautiful structure with those big white beams out front. It's like kind of like the Eiffel Tower of Everett, if you will.
There you go. Beautifully put.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And it's online and
Hmm.
also in person.
Great.
So
Great.
depending on our membership's needs,
Yeah.
you can sign up to attend in person or to be virtual.
Totally. People have access to it in a number of ways. So it'll be that Friday and Saturday. And there's going to be
Hmm.
opportunities for networking, things like that as well.
Absolutely.
As any kind of moment like this, I think it's always fun when marriage and family therapists get together. We're kind of I feel like the extroverts of the, of
Yeah.
the mental health fields, right? So it's fun to be able to hang out.
I mean,
Now,
it's all relational. Wink,
exactly,
wink.
exactly. Folks that are interested in maybe sponsorship or in exhibiting, we're going to have tables available between keynotes and breakout sessions. There's a
Absolutely.
lot of information. People can go to the website and find information about how they can become a sponsor.
Yeah, if you go to our website and you click on events, you'll
Hmm.
see the upcoming events, and below
Yep.
that is the annual conference. So if you
Hmm.
click there,
Hmm.
it'll redirect you to the conference page, and then there's the offering letter for sponsorship and
Hmm.
exhibitors,
Awesome.
as well as a form that folks will need to fill out if they want to become a sponsor or an exhibitor. Um, the venue is so beautiful,
Hmm.
and I don't know if this is something that you've encountered, but sometimes you attend conference and the exhibitors and the sponsors are like somewhere removed, like far
Yeah.
away from where everything is
Right.
happening. In this venue, they're like right there. Like we're gonna
Hmm.
have to walk through all of those tables to get
Hmm.
to where the keynotes are, as
Hmm.
well as the
Hmm.
breakout session. So I love that everything is just like in one place.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome. Nice. So great opportunity for folks that are wanting to get themselves in front of, a lot of marriage and family therapists, right? If that's a
absolutely.
business or if you have a practice that you're wanting to kind of connect with other professionals around, that's an awesome opportunity.
Hmm.
But the most important thing people can do on the website is register, right?
Register, yes.
Yes. Yes. Right. So people haven't from, now until September 19th to register.
Pretty much. Yeah,
Yeah. Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
And we are, as at LAMP, we're always trying to find ways to support our community. So
Hmm. Hmm.
we, if I can be honest, I think it's very comparable cost compared to
Mhm.
other conferences for
Right.
the level
Right.
of information and access to CEs that we're
Mhm.
getting. And as members, all our members have really good discounts on top of that, as well as our students. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
register.
Yes, yes. Act now, now's the time. So we're very excited. We're going to be seeing all y'all there. Now from here in our conversation in our podcast episode today, Claudia, people are going to be hearing from me and the speakers as we're going to talk more and go in more depth around their different topics and what people can expect from those keynotes. So
Oh,
stay tuned.
I love that. What a privilege. You're going to get a sneak peek. I love
Yes.
it.
All right, next up here, you're going to hear me in conversation with Dr. Katie Gordon, who specializes in working with eating disorders and suicidal thought and behavior. She has written the Suicidal Thoughts Workbook and the Suicidal Thoughts Guided Journal, and she will be giving one of the keynotes this fall. All right, welcome. So this episode of It's All Relational is exciting because we are focused on our conference speakers for this year. So I am lucky to be joined by one of our conference keynotes this year, Katie Gordon. Thank you for joining us today, Katie.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited for this conversation, and I'm really excited to do the keynote later on in this year.
Yeah, wonderful. Have you been to the Great Northwest before?
I have, but it's been over 5 years. I'm probably due for a revisit. It was just beautiful
Right.
up there when I was out there.
Yeah, wonderful. Have you been in the fall? I don't know if that was where you went before. So,
Yeah.
it really, I'm a California kid originally, but, being up here, the changing of seasons, leaves changing colors, you're going to get a lot of that here this September. So,
Oh, I'll have to do that in the future then and check out the fall scene. I was in the summer last time.
yeah, well, this will be good.
Mhm.
So, Katie, can you tell us a little more about your background here clinically? What brings you to this field?
Absolutely. So, I am a clinical psychologist by training,
Hmm.
and my father is a therapist. He's a marriage and family
Hmm.
therapist, actually,
Nice,
and my
nice.
mother is a nurse. And so I grew up in a family
Hmm.
that prioritized healthcare and trying
Hmm.
to really help people out to
Yeah,
live better lives. And so that sparked my interest in mental health. And then I was
right.
very fortunate to go to Florida State University and
Nice.
work with Dr. Thomas Joyner, who has been very influential in the field of suicide
Hmm.
prevention. So I
Yeah.
ended up returning for grad school there
Hmm.
and received my doctorate under his training. And so working with him made me especially passionate for working in the area of suicide prevention, because especially at the time, there were just such limits on what we knew
Yeah.
about suicide, suicidal behavior, and suicide
Right.
prevention. This was about
Right.
20 years ago now.
Right.
And we've made some advances since then, thankfully, but there's always more to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So through your academic background, you kind of found a passion for this. And, it's certainly a thing that is important for all therapists to be thinking about, right? How you approach suicidality with clients, how you approach those conversations. And you obviously have been working in this and kind of on the cutting edge for the past 20 years. So what are some of the things that you are, hoping the therapists take away from when they hear you talk, when you do trainings? What do you want people to have ears for?
The passion that drives me to really work with therapists and clinicians and in training roles is that I just love how much therapists care for their patients. And I
Hmm.
also sympathize with anxiety surrounding
Right.
suicidality. And it is just
Right.
it's so common, as we know, among patients, and that millions of
Totally.
people in the United States have suicidal thoughts every single year. And so my biggest goal is to empower therapists so that
Mm.
they feel
Hmm.
comfortable having these crucial conversations about
Right.
suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and even moving beyond kind of the initial risk assessment and safety planning, which
Right.
is extremely important, also understand and have some tools that they feel empowered to use with patients so
Hmm.
that they
Hmm.
have lives worth living that feel better. Because I think that,
Right.
I know as a therapist myself, it's it can be really intimidating, and
Yeah.
to be in a room with someone who's struggling that much and being afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. And so
Right.
that's really been my primary goal as I've focused towards training, is just to really empower therapists.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really important, thing for our field. I know when I was a, younger therapist, there's so much anxiety that comes up for you when people first start talking about that. And, I think a normal impulse to come up is to think about risk, think about your own practice, think about your license, things like that. That's pretty common, especially early on, as you're a baby therapist figuring out
Yeah.
your way here. How do you try to work with therapists that are struggling with some of that anxiety?
Really just like we would with our patients, which is to validate that
Yeah.
it's so understandable. When you
Right.
care about people, you care about your career, and it's scary to hear that someone is
Yeah.
thinking about suicide. And so I think by processing and understanding where the fear comes from, along with what are the things that you can do and what are the things you can't do, right? You can't
Right.
control factors in other people's lives.
Right. Right.
You can't take away their pain. You'd love to, but you can be present with them, and you can
Mm-hmm.
give them ideas about
Mm-hmm.
ways to improve their lives. And that's a big deal. And I think that sometimes therapists underestimate how much they are doing because their
Yeah.
patients are still struggling, and yet they would be struggling even more if they didn't have someone caring, compassionate alongside them,
Totally.
giving them tools to help them through the suicidal thoughts.
Right, and that's why it's just such a rich opportunity clinically, right? To be able to, when a person's bringing that extremely vulnerable, information to you, obviously it's a protective factor, right?
Mhm.
In preventing suicide, but it's also an opportunity clinically to be able to open up conversations, about the kind of more existential crises or dread that people might be experiencing, to kind of go deeper, right? Than you'd maybe been previous with them, and to kind of just honor the trust that they're putting in you, right? To be able to share that, it's an extraordinary opportunity.
It is, and that in and of itself can ease some of the pain and loneliness and isolation that
Yeah.
people struggling with suicidal thoughts
Right.
have experienced in the past when they've felt dismissed, or people
Yeah.
have tried to jump right into problem solving without
Right.
understanding what they're going through.
Right. And that's kind of like you were saying, that's kind of where sometimes our impulse towards like risk assessment and like safety planning, while valuable, um, can kind of mirror maybe some of the dysfunction they've experienced in other parts of their life.
100% listening first before
Yeah.
jumping in to do those things. Safety
Right.
planning saves lives, undoubtedly. I think that safety planning is extremely important. I think that it's important to think about with every single patient, and you will be more effective at safety planning if you're able to create a space where the patient, to maximize the chances that they'll be able to be honest with you and share what's going
Right.
on with them. And
Right.
then you're more likely to develop a plan that applies to them. And there's been some really interesting research showing that kind of, if a therapist creates a safety plan and kind of prescribes it, that's not nearly as impactful as
Yeah.
if it's collaborative and the
Right.
patient saying, hey, this is what I think is going to work for me. And this is what I think I'll actually do if I'm in a crisis. And so those
Yeah.
pieces are key.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, you were saying, Katie, you noticed a lot of advances here this past 20 years of your work, and I appreciate you, sharing, also being vulnerable about sharing when you went to college. I usually like to say, "Oh, it was, in the past."
Right.
Yeah, but tell me more though about like what you've witnessed over the course of your career. What advances have happened? What have you noticed that has been maybe most pivotal to this field?
Definitely. Well, one of things that really helped me to reflect on advances was I had the honor of writing 2 self-help books for suicidal thoughts. One is a
Yeah.
suicidal thoughts workbook, one is a guided journal. And my hope for those are to directly help people struggling, but also as another resource for clinicians. And my goal with those was to kind of gather what's in different pieces and texts and in the research and make it accessible. And
Yeah.
so some of the main pieces are safety planning, like we talked about, with a
Right.
specific emphasis on lethal means restriction. We know that
Yeah.
firearms storage during times of crisis, separating time and space from lethal methods
Yes.
during times of high risk is key. Same with other
Yeah.
methods for suicide. So means restriction has had a lot of great research supporting that can save lives, because most people,
Right.
when they're at the height of their suicidal risk, if they don't have access to lethal means
Yeah.
in that moment, if it recedes a little bit, the time might pass without them attempting. So that's a big piece. And I always start with that, because I think that's really, really important. And I think public policy plays a big role in that as well. And various things like we've seen recently, the Golden Gate Bridge has a barrier up, and that
Right.
and that was
Right.
huge for lethal means restriction. And
Right.
it took a long time to get that approved. So I think those things are very important. And then the other pieces that I dive into very much are related to cognitive behavioral therapy, because there is some research suggesting that can reduce suicidal ideation. It pulls principles from CAMS, Collaborative Assessment and Management of Suicidality, or
Yeah.
CAMS, has been
Right.
shown to be effective, as well as pieces from dialectical behavior and cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
You mentioned existential pieces of this as well. And in my books and in my practice, one of my favorite sources of existential, I would say, discussion and tools for patients is related to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so a lot of what, Frankl worked with people who were struggling with suicidal thoughts before the Holocaust and before
Right.
going into concentration camps. And then,
Right.
of course, observed that in his experiences, and then to write this amazing book that talks about how having meaning and connection can prevent people from entering this existential vacuum
Yeah.
and wanting to die by suicide is so powerful. So
Right.
a lot of
Right.
looking at thoughts, activities, values, and things that help people view their life in ways that are more self-compassionate and more
Yeah.
meaningful, and
Right.
also give them some tools for soothing the pain that drives suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's extremely meaningful, powerful work that we get to do with individuals. Now, obviously, this is a marriage and family therapy conference, right? So we're systemic thinkers. We're working usually with families or couples, right? Alongside of, suicidal thoughts. And I'm curious kind of how you like to weave in work with other support systems like that as a means for suicidal prevention.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that the individual therapy model sometimes may be necessary when people are truly isolated.
Absolutely.
But I'm
Right.
always thinking from the beginning, how can we bring in supports? And
Yeah.
how can we
Right.
form new connections? Because
Right.
as we know, in most emergency situations, if someone breaks a leg or they're having a heart attack, we don't expect them to kind of pull themselves up and get through it themselves. There are certain
Right.
roles that they play that they can help, but we don't expect them to be able to think clearly and do the things that they need. We expect them to lean on other people who are going to help them. And so
Exactly.
similarly, I think when struggling with suicidal thoughts, especially people who are in
Yeah.
acute crises, it's really important to identify whether it's a partner or family member.
Right.
And I think try to think broadly. Is it someone from their
Yeah.
spiritual community? Is it a
Sure.
mentor? There's been
Right.
a lot of increase in peer work that I think is so important too. And for a lot of that work, I think that sometimes the stressors that are driving the suicidal thoughts can exist within those interpersonal systems. So if the marriage is having
Yeah,
difficulties, maybe
of
you're
course.
addressing some of the marital items or the family issues that are driving that.
Right.
And then other times it's that their loved ones just don't know how to support them, and they really, really want to, and they're saying things that are their
Right.
best guesses, but they don't know. And so sometimes the therapy involves really a lot of just education and talking about like how can the patient themselves express what they need, and how can their loved ones respond in a way that's most helpful, and also
Yeah.
how can those people in their support network get the support they need too,
Right.
because I think it can be so painful to see a loved one struggling with that. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's crucial. We can make a much more impact looking in families and systems than just isolated individuals.
Right. And that's what a lot of, our audience and the folks that are going to be attending the keynote are going to be thinking about, right? Because they're working with families, they're working with couples that are dealing with this. And like you're saying, really trying to, turn clients towards each other, towards connection, like you would in any other moment of crisis, medical or otherwise, right, is a valuable sort of thing.
Absolutely.
So, can you tell us a little more about what the keynote's going to be like, what people can expect? Give us a little bit of the trailer or the preview here.
Sure. One of the things that I like to share with clinicians is a leading scientific theory of suicide called the three-step theory. And the
Okay.
reason that I like to share that, it's by Klonsky and colleagues, is because it's got scientific support. And I think it's really helpful clinically to conceptualize what's driving people's suicidal behavior so that clinicians know what to target. And so it really just to a brief explanation of it. It talks about how suicidal thoughts are driven by pain and hopelessness, and that they intensify when someone is feeling disconnected from their life, where their pain exceeds their connections, and then they're at higher risk to attempt when they have that capability for suicide. So maybe they have access to lethal means or low fear about death. And the promise of this model is one that it goes across all the diverse pathways that people can lead people to suicidal thoughts, because it focuses on like, what are the commonalities? You've probably seen, I've seen lists of risk factors for suicide, and it can be 20, 30 things because people have different pathways. And then as a clinician, you're thinking, okay, but now what do I do? I've got 40 things here and I don't know what to do. What this does is it also presents an opportunity to talk with the patient about where's the pain coming from? Where is the hopelessness coming from? And then targeting those specific things in your work together. So that's one of the main pieces I want to talk about. And that second step, like I said, really focuses on connections to life. And that's where I think the systemic pieces are absolutely crucial. And the broader world and environment that people live in certainly impact suicidal thoughts, as well as their smaller systems within their families. And so I want to talk about how this is relevant for each of those. And hopefully there will be some takeaway points that people can use right away in their practice.
Yeah, wonderful. And like you said, that kind of second step as part of this three-step process is especially relevant for our audience. The folks that are working with systems very directly are going to be able to use that, very tangibly. So what's something you like people that see your keynote to be able to say at the end of it?
I want them to say that they understand that the work they do is valuable. It's hard. And it's not always easy to see the value that you have in people's lives if they continue to struggle. But even not referring someone out who's struggling is a big deal. There are a lot of patients who their therapists just like, okay, well, this is too intense and I don't feel comfortable treating you. That's understandable. But just continuing to meet with them is valuable. Secondly, I want them to be able to feel some sense of excitement about trying new interventions, new tools, and showing up with their patient with just new ideas. Because I think even the ideas that there are different ways to work with these suicidal thoughts sends a message that there is hope, because we're saying there are new ways to approach this. You've tried other ways, and yet there are more. And so that even builds the hope of maybe that wasn't effective, but here, I'm sitting with you, and we're gonna keep trying different things, and we're gonna find something. And sometimes those are bigger things, like resolving marital issues, and sometimes they are things that seem small but that have a big impact, like having them greet themselves with more self-compassion, and that can ease some of the pain that they're experiencing as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I'm very confident that, our members are going to be able to say that at the end of your keynote, just based on how you're presenting this today. I'm very excited to hear more here this September. So thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today. And we are so excited to see you this September.
Thank you. It's an honor to do this, and I really appreciate the conversation today. I'm really looking forward to this.
All right. Next, I'm going to be in conversation with Dr. Kini Chang and Dr. Arash Daneshzadeh, and we are going to be discussing their shared keynote presentation. They're going to be talking about intergenerational trauma and the miseducation of our healing. All right, welcome. On this episode of It's All Relational, we are really lucky to be joined by two of our keynote speakers coming up for conference, Kini and Arash. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Yeah. So, if you could just both give me a little background for both of you on what brought you to this field and what interested you in your topic.
Arash, you want to go first?
Please, after you.
I think it was such a huge question, Trevor, because I think for me, in many ways, being a healer and going into the work of intergenerational trauma has probably been a calling, probably most of my lifetime. I just discovered it at a point in my life. And so what brings me to this work, I think, comes from the lineage of women that I come from. And what I mean by that is the connection to the ancestry, to the suffering, to the resilience, to the healing, to what family means, to what collectivism, a community means. And when I talk about this piece, it's really in some ways the suffering of some of my ancestors. I mentioned previously that my grandmother from my maternal side went through 2 wars, World War II during Japanese occupation, where she was orphaned and all of her family was killed. And then later in her life through the Cultural Revolution where communism took over, and then having to flee when she was pregnant to Hong Kong. And so I think about how that's carried in our bloodline in this work. And so as I've heard of these stories from my family, my mom, my grandmother, and other folks, it really has felt like healing is what I'm meant to do. I haven't always known what that looked like, but as I sit with that and like listen intuitively and listen into wisdom, I'm listening into the wisdom of their wisdom, really. Something that I practice every day is actually meditation and communication with our ancestors, my ancestors specifically, because it's very common actually in Chinese culture to light incense, chat with our ancestors. And it might seem odd in some cultural spaces, especially like in American culture, but it's super normal. And they guide me, right? They guide me on what my path is, what I'm meant to do, who I'm meant to connect with, what is my platform even, right? And so in many ways, it's always been intergenerational trauma, healing and resistance or resilience. There just wasn't a term for it. And even now, I kind of resist this term a little bit because it's a Western devised psychological term called intergenerational trauma, but and resilience, right? But this has existed since human beings have existed. And so I feel tension with that because now it's labeled in psychology and we're able to say, look, we know what this is, but like we've always known what this is. But now it fits into the construct of Western psychology. So to be perfectly honest, it is a difficult tension for me. And what that means. And so I'm very mindful to indicate and note, yes, in psychology, we're calling it this thing, but note that it has been around for always. Right.
It's not like Christopher Columbus discovering, this
and
idea,
I'm like rejecting that completely. I encourage our clinicians and folks in this work to name that, right? To acknowledge and name that, even though this is what has brought about research, epigenetics. I get in the Western world, it creates an opening for this, but also how do we balance honoring where it truly comes from and how we champion this work forward?
Yeah. Wow. So like you're saying, kind of you're connected to this even before birth, right? With the kind of ancient wisdom, right, that you're trying to bring
Yeah.
to, these ideas that, in the West we're maybe trying to find ways to encounter. Very, very exciting, meaningful history and background you bring to this, Kini. What about for you, Arash?
I mean, I echo so much of what Kenny said, especially around reimagining um, therapeutic spaces as sites of not just collective repair, but liberation, and how those two things are inextricably linked,
Yeah.
whether we know it or not.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the reasons why I called my keynote "The Miseducation of Our Healing," a love letter to our collective recovery, because the work that I've done, well, first of all, I should say, just in terms of my own roots and what led me to this praxis. So I'm mixed race. So my mom is Egyptian Berber. So her dad was Black. And he was in an interracial relationship with my grandmother, who is Egyptian Arab, and then my dad is Persian. So basically, you could say I'm Puerto Rican. No, I'm just kidding. But no, but because of that, she was actually a journalist in the first chapter outside of Chicago, New York, and Oakland of the Black Panther Party. And she used to write about anti-Blackness in Algeria and Egypt against the Berbers, especially under French colonization. And because of that, there were threats on her life, and she basically was extradited to Iran because at that time, Iran was taking political refugees and asylees from North Africa. And she met my dad and then they had my two older brothers who died in the war against Iraq. And I was able to get asylum because I'm the last boy in my family carrying the family name. And so because of that, we were able to get political asylum because of my mother's activism and the fact that I was growing up in a country where they basically conscripted kids as young as 11 and 12, especially if you came from families that were politically active. Like mine. And so I would say I'm a byproduct of a host of external traumas that have led to a very zigzagged route to understanding epigenetics and intergenerational trauma, but primarily due to U.S. imperialism and Western imperialism. And there's an existential contradiction and a cognitive dissonance that I live with even now, after years of not only being in therapy, but providing therapeutic services to clients, students, and families. And that is unintentionally perpetuating the same things that we purport to be subverting. And that is sort of something that I have had great tension with. This is something that I probably say once every conversation I have with Kini, of this like cognitive dissonance that I have of like, I'm living in the country that is responsible for making me a refugee in the first place. And I'm serving other refugees. Prior to my role as a professor for 3 years in the beginning of COVID, I was the director of refugee resettlement for Contra Costa County. I helped resettle 3,000 refugees after the U.S. military withdrawal in 2021 from Afghanistan and Western Africa, where there were military bases that the Biden administration pulled out of. There's obviously a circuitous poetry to being who I am and doing that work, but it would not have been done well and with the same level of compassion and nuanced empathy had it not been for my own examination of the impact of intergenerational trauma and inherited wounds. Much of which Kini elaborated on. My own ability to identify barriers to wholeness perpetuated by dominant narratives around being a cishet man of color, a mixed race man of color who is sensitive, who cares about others, who constantly wants to divest from the patriarchy. I understand that these things are newfangled now, much less growing up in a time where Kathleen Cleaver was coming over to my house to have tea with my mom. Like, I didn't understand the gravitas of the political education that I was getting. But most importantly, I didn't understand the intersection between the political education and the healing education.
Mm-hmm.
The link between polyvagal theory and the polycrisis, which you know, folks like Bruce Perry and Gabor Mate and some of my you know, intellectual North Stars in this field have you know, expounded on through their praxis for decades. So I know that I'm newer to this work, although I've been doing this work for 23 years.
Right.
And so I would say there's 4 key points that have sort of led me to this sustained work. And one is I'm a child of war and displacement. So as a result, a refugee whose early experiences were shaped by generational trauma and cultural erasure and survival is just something that I gravitate to wanting to serve. It's sort of how I honors my brother's deaths.
Right.
And you can call that martyrdom, you can call that saviorism. For me, it gave me a purpose.
Yeah.
I can remember in high school having 3 pictures in my locker. One was a picture of Tupac because I wanted to be a poet just like him. One was a picture of Aaliyah. Now I'm carbon dating myself because I was finna be my wife.
Yes.
And the third picture, I didn't bring it up, but it's actually downstairs. I can grab it for you. Is actually a picture of where the Iraqi F-16 missile hit my house 2 months after we left for the United States to live in a refugee camp in Berlin along the way. And every time I think about sort of cosmic forces and purpose, whether you believe in a higher being or you're spiritual or not, there, you know, I made it past that. And so what am I going to do with that? You know, I think of my life as borrowed time at all times. And as a result, I don't take that for granted. And so for me, I was raised in communities where healing happened around kitchen tables, not on therapy couches. You know what I mean? And that shaped my belief in collective, culturally rooted approaches to wellness. You know, and I can remember, you know, my mom having to work 3 jobs as a shelfer at the library where she cleaned houses and she was doing random tasks for neighbors. And I was left to learn from the Black and brown women in the mission prior to gentrification who raised me. Right. And so that was my first therapist. You know, my mom had a 5th grade education, but she gave me my first copy of A Fire Next Time. You know what I mean? So she was my first school. And so I don't take for granted the healing and the resilience that I come from, and I honor that time. Thirdly, I would say I came into this work through restorative justice as an approach to my practice because my doctoral dissertation at UC Davis School of Education was on the intersection between trauma-informed pedagogy and specifically restorative justice, because I've noticed how liberalism has actually co-opted so many forms of restorative justice to mean that we are actually fixing people rather than fixing systems. And so it's paramount that we stop conflating restoration and start thinking about the dividends of our pain as a byproduct and not as the root cause. Right. And so anyone who understands polyvagal theory, who understands trauma and, you know, the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system understands these things. But oftentimes when it comes to ourselves, it can be very hard to forgive, especially when you know better. And finally, I would say that my journey into healing informed work and healing organizing work has always been about asking, leaning into curiosity. What would happen if the child that was inside of me that didn't start going to therapy until 28. I'm not going to say how old I am now, but I've been in therapy for well over a decade.
Tupac, Aaliyah, we get it. You know,
we're healed out loud, right? Together. To Kini's point about community and communal healing, rather than silently and alone. And I think so much of the Western philosophy around healing has been something that you do in the shadows. And as a result, we sometimes, especially when we have bumps and bruises, like in any learning endeavor, it can be really difficult to let yourself off the hook, to not be draconian inwards. Almost this like chivalrous self-deprecating that kicks in anytime you're not perfect. And it took my ethnic studies education, it took my therapy education, it took my own DBT journey to understand that healing is not linear. And more importantly, I need to expect that. And so it allowed me to be a better teacher, a better professor, and a better servant leader in being able to examine myself. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, well,
I feel like Arash answered like many of the pieces, which is pretty cool. He kind of interwove it all together.
And obviously
Very
y'all
healthy.
come from wonderful, backgrounds, histories and stories that, demonstrate resilience, right? Like you're speaking to, Kenny. Now, as therapists, as a marriage and family therapist, we're systemic thinkers, right? Kind of we're speaking the same language here. And our role in people's lives usually are on those therapy couches like you're describing, right? So I'm excited to hear more from y'all about how you want to educate us as therapists, right? People that are, folks are coming to for healing, right? About how to kind of make space for all of these really exciting ideas, and specifically, the intergenerational trauma, right, is kind of, what Kenny, you're kind of leading with your keynote. Tell us more about like what marriage and family therapists are going to be learning from that process.
I think what I want to say about that is in kind of tacking on to what Arash was talking about, which is the systems piece.
Yeah.
Like we're really talking about
Right.
systems 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, right? Like there's the fundamental things that we learn in our education as
Right.
and systems work, but we really come from, I think, more a family systems aspect when we talk about psychotherapy. And what we're saying is that if we look at this as concentric circles and we are interconnected through a system and the minutia nuances between those interconnectedness of systems, that's where the work is, right? It's not just in family. It isn't just in intergenerational dynamic within families. I think there's an association that trauma within families is what we're talking about, but trauma happens in systems, happens in workplaces, happens in government, right? We're gaslit by our government systems. And so it's very important to acknowledge that systems is broader than maybe we are trained as psychotherapists to look at the various ways that we are deeply impacted and sometimes where our lens doesn't orient ourselves to. And I would say and urge that we have a responsibility as psychotherapists to look at the places that we're not trained and to look at the way that systems are inadvertently impacting us, which includes capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism, colonialism, racism, right? The isms are interwoven into our identities and the work that we do, no matter what our social location is and what is the body that we occupy, right? Like, and the land that we occupy. And so it's an invitation, but pretty like hard, like, I don't know if it's harsh is the right word, but like a strong invitation to look at it in an honest and real way. And so I would say that our folks who are going to be part of Arash in my keynote will probably have a pretty honest dialogue about these components. And so I would say be ready to have honest dialogue with us and talk about systems beyond family systems, beyond MFT training, but how and how to be responsible for that and how to be in partnership in what healing means. So I think the invitation is an honest look, but an invitation to be partners with us.
Yeah, and to be challenged, right? An invitation to be challenged and recognize that, that's part of what learning is, right? Is that encountering things that are uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say for me, there's a book project I'm doing with Sage Publishing right now. It's called Third Spaces of Healing, and it's on third space theory, which is Chris Gutierrez. She's this educational psychologist who teaches at a UC Berkeley, and she writes a lot about third space. It's not my term, it's hers. But I'm playing off of that term to say that in schools, there's usually a counselor and a therapist, someone who's consigned to deal with those issues in a very niche way. And the classroom is supposed to be separate and apart from those conversations. The dialectic of healing is usually is in a different space than where pedagogy begins and ends. And so what Chris Gutierrez talks about is so much of, I think, resonant with what Kini just said, which is there are these concentric circles, and within the circles, there are these permeable membranes that you can't separate, right? Healing isn't mutually exclusive from what's happening in the world and what's happening in your neighborhood and what's happening at your own house. And so how do we think beyond traditional clinical settings? Because healing and trauma happen in beyond traditional settings.
Yeah.
And so it would be remiss to try to bifurcate the two. It actually makes your job harder, right?
Right.
And so what I would say people can expect from my portion is really a gut honest invitation to reflect on how we've seen and how we've been miseducated about healing, especially in systems built on pathology and productivity and, quite frankly, eugenics, if I may. And I would say a blend of personal narrative, cultural critique, and really community-rooted strategies for creating shared pathways to recovery. And some of the examples that I give, and this was somewhat from the parenthetical conversation we were having earlier, Trevor, I taught in prisons for 11 years. And when I was getting my teaching credential, I was a high school teacher before I became a professor. I taught in juvenile halls. And I can recall every Father's Day, I would teach summer school specifically because I grew up mostly without a father myself. And so when I would sit with the students, and I don't call them inmates, my students who happen to be incarcerated, because this isn't Orange is the New Black. And I would speak to them about what that day meant for them. They would say just the commiseration of how they wanted to be there for their own kids and how they wanted to plan to show up as fathers as young men of color. And put somewhat proverbial light in the darkness that they had in their childhoods, to me was healing. I mean, they've told me as much, right? And so I would say how we create these veritable love letters to clinicians and caregivers who are on the brink, because, the healers need healing too. And we need a roadmap for remembering why we chose this work in the first place. And I find that when I'm vulnerable with other clinicians, oftentimes it kind of gets folks to sort of circumvent some of the nuance and get back to the root of the work. And so they can expect to laugh, they can expect to feel seen, and hopefully leave with a bigger, even deeper commitment to healing that is more bold and collective and frankly liberatory. We're not just trying to liberate people from their pain, but we're trying to liberate folks from the systems that cause that pain, so the healing is actually sustained. We're not putting Band-Aids over bullet wounds.
I would echo that as well. I think that thematically, my aspect of my keynote is very much what Arash is talking about as well. And that's something that clinicians will be able to experience and walk away with as well. But it's going to be an experience for them. And I'm super excited about that. In a non-traditional way that we would think about a keynote. We're experiencing with folks that will be here with us. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so many folks that I work with, therapists that I work with, that are feeling, like, oh, I feel like there's limits to what I can do as a therapist right now in our current environment, in a situation where feeling very overwhelmed, right? And I think what's exciting about what y'all are talking about is that there is this invitation to think bigger, right? And think differently about traditional therapeutic ideas in a way that will generate hope, right? And generate a sense of things being able to be different, right, than they are. And that's the concept of therapy, I think, right? Is just being able to imagine and enact change. So very exciting ideas here and things that we have to look forward to from y'all's keynote.
Thank you, Trevor.
Thanks, Trevor.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we will be seeing you very soon here, coming up in September. So thank you for giving us the time and giving us an idea and flavor of what's going to be coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was great. And I haven't had a chance to be with Arash as well. So it's just really nice to be in the space with you, Arash. I just want to say that, name that, and acknowledge your presence in the world, our work together. And I'm excited for what we're going to create.
Thank you, Kini.
Yeah. All right. That wraps up our mammoth podcast about the annual WAMFT conference. We're very excited about this event here at WAMFT. And everything you need to know for this conference is on our website, wamft.org. You can go there and you can register. And just so you know the details of the conference, times, locations, make sure you're at the right space at the right time. It's September 19th and 20th at the Edward D. Hanson Conference Center in Everett, Washington. It runs from 8 to 5:30. Coming out soon is going to be a schedule with the breakout sessions, workshops, keynotes, so you know where and when to be for each one of those. There's going to be networking opportunities in between that. If you want to be an exhibitor or a sponsor, please go on our website. There's easy ways to do that. There's different tiers and levels of sponsorship and different levels of tickets depending on if you are a student, if you're a member, if you're going to attend virtually or not. We look forward to seeing you there this September, and please share with all of your friends and colleagues.